Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I am Daniel Kamak, the current co-champion of the Blue City Brawl.
And I'm Rob Enough. I like the sound of that. I don't get to say that very much. Before this, the first two were ogres. So Manticon, the first one, and then Shiloh Slaughter. Maybe you're my good luck charm, because were you not at all those events? I think you were.
I was definitely at Manticon.
Weren't you at Shiloh Slaughter?
I've been to a few Shilohs. I don't know if it was that one, but I've been to some, so maybe.
Well, we'll just say you are my good luck charm, and we'll leave it at that. And we won't bury the lead. We got plans for next year, too. We're coming for it again next year.
Yeah, I can't speak on it yet.
I like the fact, though, that we kept it hidden. Well, obviously, we're here to talk about this year's Blue City Brawl. And before we get to this year, I figured it might be nice to talk, what is the Blue City Brawl? It is a doubles event at its core. But it's a doubles event that I would say has a significant soft score component, both on the sportsmanship side and the hobby side. I don't know about you, Dan, but I've always seen it as this is the pageant, the pageant, the event that is a pageant for, the best of Mantic models, the coolest armies, the most rich, dripping themes. But, I mean, when you think about Blue City Brawl, what does that evoke in you?
So it has moved to that. There was a very conscious decision. It got a bit away from that, where people were just bringing two armies that they thought would work really well together and try to come up with some really cool combos. But we really, in the past, I'd say 2 to 3 years, tried to make it incentivize people bringing more Mantic armies and showcase what can really be done with that. We're always also trying to have the best party we can, too. So that's...
Yeah. 100%.
Pro Mantic and pro party.
If you're trying to showcase Mantic models, 1,000 points is not a high barrier. It's a good entry point for that. Yeah. So Blue City Brawl's been around since 2017. I ran the first three. You ran in a few of those. We ran them at Chris Gibney's establishment, formerly known as the Rat House. When we started those first three, for me, the highlight was always the opening ceremony, that little pageantry of, what's your background story? If you've grudged somebody, will explain to me why they're your arch enemy. And we've had all kinds of stuff from people writing songs and actually singing them with guitar accompaniment. We've had sexy firemen come out, a interpretation of the dance from The Lion King, the presenting of Simba. So that was always crazy times. And then obviously that third one ended in 2019. And then we had a couple of years where we had no Blue City Brawl because of COVID. At that point, I had different things to do, different priorities. So I was moving on to Kings of Memphis, which is now entering its 5th year. The Blue City guys took up the mantle for Blue City, and it's in great hands. And the first one was in 2022, and I love the fact you guys moved to Meddlesome Brewery. So I know you've adjusted the time of the year that it's been at, make it a little bit more environmentally friendly for people. The last 2 years, it's been in March.
And on that topic, I was up at Meddlesome on Saturday, and Ben was up there, who now runs Meddlesome. And I told him, we love March. Please let us have a weekend in March. We're open to whatever weekend we can get, but, just make it somewhere near there. And he was like, we love having you guys, and we'll make sure you're squared away. Just definitely give us some advance notice. Since switching to March, we've loved, where the temperature's been at, because it is not air conditioned. There was talk about possibly another venue that is similar but does have air condition that we've floated, but it may be something that we look at. But for now, we're really happy with Meddlesome in March.
Yeah, I think the venues historically have always been a huge part of party atmosphere. So the 3 years we held it at Chris Gibney's home, it was great. And moving it to Meddlesome, it's great to have a microbrew, right? I think March is a great time of the year in Memphis.
Yeah, we're really planning on locking that time down, unless we look at the other venue we might be looking at, which we could do year round. It's air conditioned.
So if you want more information about the previous Blue City Brawls, just go over to countercharge.net, go all the way to the bottom of the page. There's a search function. Just type in Blue City Brawl. You'll find lots of coverage of the various events. I was trying to remember, how did we finish last year?
I'm pretty sure it was third. It was either second or third, but I think third was where we were last year.
Let's just start with, what were our aspirations for this year? Obviously, I don't think we were looking to win the event. That was not on my radar at the beginning. In fact, I think if you look at the list we took, there were a few concessions that we took just because we wanted, Succubi is a good example. I wanted to paint Succubi, so we have Succubi in our list. But from your perspective, what was your aspiration for the event?
It was purely to win hobby. I mean, I'm always going to, try hard in the games I play, but I could have lost every game, won hobby, and been a happy camper. That was the goal. We started 4 months in advance, 5 months in advance, trying to get there, and the entire time that was the plan. And I'm pleased with where we ended up. But yeah, the success on the tabletop was unexpected, to say the least.
A blind squirrel finds a nut every so often. Yeah, I just sort of stumbled into it.
I was not super enthused with our Abyss half of the army and how it would work on the table. I thought it was a little underpowered, maybe against some people who were, trying to make some really nasty combos, but it turned out well. I think Night Stalkers, what we took was, everything we took was considered pretty good. So I thought that list would function pretty well, and it did. But I was surprised by the Abyss doing as well as it did. And there was some synergy there. So, it worked out.
The Abyssal side, for me, it was kind of like, let's bring unit strength. Let's bring some big units with regen. So we had the Horde of Lower Abyssals, and we had the Abyssal Guard and the Succubi. We had a couple characters. The Abyssal side brought the best character that we had, which is that damn Seductress with the glass shield. I mean, she won us there was at least one game where I would argue she won us the game just because we put it into the right target and she stood there the whole time. Now, we've also abused her by not playing her correctly or not remembering what could happen with command dice sometimes, or getting wiped out by a fancy surge, but, them's the breaks, as they say.
Indeed.
Well, let's just maybe touch a little bit on the pack. One of the things that I love, and I like to poke fun at Devlin, but, it is on brand for Devlin and the rest of the Blue City guys, which is you're lazy. And so, like, the same pack that I created back in 2017 is literally still in circulation. The same score sheets that I created. Now, you updated them, you tweaked them, you changed the logo, but by and large, it's the same pack. And that just tickles me to no end, the fact that if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
This is the cost I pay for teaming up with Rob.
Oh, yes. Let's maybe touch a little bit on the pack for this year, because I know there was a few changes. Obviously, command dice is one of the big changes. What I like is it's still 2 1,000-point armies, and I really like 1,000 points. I don't think it's a huge barrier to entry. It's not like I got to paint 1 million models. I mean, you got to paint some, right? Depends on what army you take. But I'm going to the pairings event at Adepticon, and it's 1,200 points, which is like, okay, 1,200 points now. You're starting to get into that real army size, right? And so
that's another beefy unit on top of, what
correct
1,000 points is.
So I like the 1,000 points. I don't know when you guys added this, but was it this year that you added the ability that we could take one unique unit or option?
That was this year. Yeah, and I think it worked really well.
100%. I love it. I mean, historically, when I ran BCB, you couldn't take any unique or legendary things. There's already enough filth that's going to come into the fact that you have a doubles event where you can essentially treat an army as part of your army that wasn't meant to be like that. There's little shenanigans that pop up with that. So I like the fact they limit it to one. And for us, we used it to upgrade the Abyssal Guard to whatever they're called.
The Oathbreakers, I think.
The Oathbreakers, thank you. I also love the fact that you could only take a magical artifact once per team. It prevents double brew of haste and those kind of shenanigans.
Both teams would take Blood of the Old King if they could.
100%.
So just, keep it down to one. Boots, a Strider, that kind of thing.
Really like that I think this has always been this way, that we treat our partner's army as core to our army. So that means we can cast on those units, provided the keywords are in play, right? If there's auras and stuff, keywords may come into play. But by and large, if you want to cast heal on your or celestial restoration on your partner's units, fine by them. And in the case this year, we got command dice too. So also, I think another thing we started this the very first one, which is each player drops during deployment. If we win the choice and we're deploying first, I put a Forces of the Abyss unit down and you put a Night Stalker down. Totally speeds the game up a lot.
Very much so, yeah.
And then we get into, let's just maybe talk a little about Command Dice, because that's the first time we've had it. First of all, love it. A lot of events are opting out.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way for me to learn if Command Dice are awesome and if they work and what needs to be improved if I don't get to use them. The wrinkle here was that the FAQ hit, maybe a month before the event. So he kept the free red, white, and blue, but then made the decision that we can't buy any extra dice, which totally fair, because we're going to talk about the brawlers in a minute. Most of the brawlers, I believe, have a free dice as well. So,
correct.
And so we had a red, 2 white, and a blue, which I don't know about you. I felt like we probably had enough command points.
Probably.
Let's touch on the brawlers, because I think ultimately the first 3 events that we had for Blue City, we had a king, and then you guys pivoted to a brawler. So the king there was just one of them. But I loved it when you kind of made it your own and it became the brawler, which was a tabletop representation of one of the club members. I thought that's just super cool. And I also like the fact that you rotate some in and out, because sometimes they get overused.
Last year, it was very heavy Devlin and myself, so we nerfed them a bit, and we ended up not seeing us this year, which is totally fine.
So all the brawlers start with this profile, which is speed 6, melee 3, defense 5, 6 attacks, 13, 15 nerve, 1 unit strength, and height 3. And for scenario purposes, they count as 200 points, even though they're free to the army. They're also crushing strength 1, inspiring, nimble, and radiance of life. So the brawlers this year, option 1 was Lennon and Gibney, which is a steadfast pair of friends. They're on 1 base. They have unit strength 2 instead of 1, and they have crushing strength 2 instead of 1, and they have Pathfinder Cloak of Death, and they come up with a red command dice. Then we have Billy, which, Billy's got a shooting attack, 18-inch range, hits on 4, steady aim, piercing 1. It's on brand for Billy. He's
a dwarf ranger.
Mastiff gunlance.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had Goad, which adds wild charge D3 plus D6 attacks, Dread, and he comes with a white command dice. Then there is Devlin, which he is dash 15. Obviously, that's a nod to his love of the Empire of Dust. Again, shambling. He has a shambling special rule. He has ensnare, and he comes with a blue dice. You, sir, are speedy, because you're the one that's probably the most athletic of the bunch here. Speed 7, Thunderous Charge 1. You have Elite in melee, Vicious in melee, and red command dice. Now, I have to ask you, when you see yourself manifested in these rules, do you not feel compelled to take yourself?
I was probably my second choice for our list. Yeah, we haven't hit Bowen yet, I don't think. Yep. But Bowen is a speed 10 flyer, which we sorely needed in our list to project a little threat. We didn't have a slow army, but it wasn't exactly fast either. It was kind of a middle speed. We had a lot of infantry, for the most part. So I thought that would complement more. But no, I would have loved to have played with myself on the table. Let's put it that way.
For sure. Well, so let's get to it. We did select Bowen, who is speed 10 with fly. He comes with a white command dice. And we'll talk about some of the wonky interactions with the scenario that we certainly abused to our advantage, certainly in the first game, if I recall correctly.
The right word.
When he has a token, he doesn't have the limitations that you normally get when you have a token. So he could still fly. He could still be speed 10. Maybe an oversight. I don't know. In fact, I have a feeling that Bowen's going to get crippled next year, because we saw a lot of him on the table.
He's definitely getting a nerf.
What'd you think of the command dice? We obviously had the 2 from Forces of the Abyss, which is Fireball and reroll regen. We never used the Fireball. Maybe we did the regen one time. We never really.
I think it was once.
Yeah, and what we did use almost every time we could was the fantastic ferocious charge. And what's funny? How great it was and how we used it wasn't a result of the fact that we have Abyssals with Night Stalkers, because the best use for it was the Doppelgangers, which is already in the Night Stalker army. It's already a legal target in that army. But just talk to me about your experience with command dice at the event.
For me, I'm very pro command dice. I do think there were some complaints about how balanced they were. Some faction commands are better than others, which I think we can obviously say is true. Ferocious Charge is amazing, and some others aren't quite as impactful. I like the addition to the game. It does add a bit more time, and I will say it probably added a bit more time in our BCB games, which on the whole, Kings of War games, you can usually get done in 2 hours, and a lot of other games are hitting 3+ hours, so I don't think that's a huge detriment. limiting us being able to buy dice probably helped keep the time down as well, because I'm sure there were turns if we got 8 command dice, we would have loved the region, reroll the region and a ferocious charge. But on the whole, I thought they added a lot to the event. I enjoyed playing with them. Maybe there's some bias because ferocious charge, other than one time, really paid off for us. I'm very pro command dice and BCB and just the game in general.
I think the command dice kind of adds the special sauce that we may have been missing. I've been at this for a long time. I started playing in 2010. I think we're ready for something like command dice. And I'm not saying the way it's implemented today is where it needs to be, but I think we need something.
I agree.
My complaint about command dice is probably what's shared by a lot of people, which is there's command dice rich and command dice poor. And what I mean by that is there's some factions that just have commands and you don't take them.
Yeah.
I really am of the opinion that the change to 3 red is the right move, because it's sort of now, if you have good commands, you have to opt in to get them. You don't get them for free. You're gonna have, because I don't know what the average on 3 red are, but it's probably not that good.
I don't either. 2 point something, I think.
Now, if you want to make use of those really good command dice or those command orders, you have to spend some points to get the resources to generate that. And if you have an army that has crappy ones that you don't want to use, then you're not out anything. You don't feel like you're at a disadvantage because, you're getting this resource that you can't really leverage and your opponent is. I'm excited about where it goes. I'm a huge fan of Firefight as well. And I think if they can move in that direction where it's tied to, the commanders you take and stuff, I think it'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's time to talk about the army. And in parallel with this episode, there are a number of blogs on countercharge.net that is going over basing, display boards, painting, lots of photos. Those blogs are really kind of a tutorial supplement to what we're talking about here. And I would say that the blogs themselves, it's not a complete tutorial where it's every single little detail, but I think it's enough to give you the flavor that you'll understand what we did.
Yeah, I think we tried to keep it accessible without being straight recipe of step 1, step 2, step 3. And I put it in the painting blog that I did. I'm always happy to talk paint, so if there's something that is confusing or you want more details on, feel free to reach out.
I felt like Dan Kamek this week because I recorded a podcast and Jeremy took a shot at me by saying, "Oh, oil paints, that's so hipster." This must be what like Dan feels like every day of his life.
Yeah, that's a day in my life right there. I love the oil paints.
I'm growing to love them as well. I'm using them on a Abyssal Dwarf Armada fleet for some of the brighter colors, and I love it. It scratches a different itch. It's a different technique, and I don't know that it's necessarily faster. I just enjoy learning something new. I'm somebody that's always trying to grow.
Me too. And I would say, just because, don't write something off because, it's niche or hipster. There's a tool for every job, and I can guarantee you there are some times when oil paint is the right tool for the job. Well, specifically on large flat surfaces.
Jeremy is painting a Northern Alliance army, and his ice elementals have the James Wapple style environmental effect, where you can see the different skylines in all the panels.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to follow James Wapple, but he's not using oil paints. So it's taking like an art. James is just going to go, here's a number 4 brush, here's some oil paint. He's done.
I love Wapple. Yeah, and I've seen Jeremy actually sent me some of his stuff, the ice elementals, and they look great, but I'm sure it's taken a lot of time.
All right, well, let's talk about the army itself. And I think, Dan, where I want to start is we just kind of were spitballing like some general questions that we talked about. Like, was there a certain play style we wanted? Do we think there was a good combination of armies that we thought would work thematically or good on the table? Were there specific units that we did want to paint or didn't want to paint? So talk to me about your end when you came into this, before you and I were chatting, like, what were you thinking? Because if I recall correctly, you came knowing you wanted to do Night Stalkers.
Before we even got to Night Stalkers, I came in knowing that we wanted to be full Mantic, which basically cut it down to ranges that had recently had some love, like, a good plastic kit, some resin models, which shortened the list, considerably. We kicked around a few, and Abyss was pretty brand new at the time, getting their rework, I think. And, Night Stalkers was one of the earlier ones, but they knocked that one out of the park. And just the theme of the two, kind of hellish monster, seemed to work well together. Because for the goal to be hobby, I didn't want it to be too difficult to blend the armies together. And those are two armies that kind of pull on a similar theme without even really having to do much, which, obviously we did a lot after that, but I wanted it to be as seamless as possible. So that's kind of where we ended up.
When I look back at last year, there were some certain things that I could identify that we can significantly improve on. So number one, the paint needs to match, right? Not just we both did cool palettes, right? Literally use the same paint. Even if the execution is different, the color and the tone and all that is the same. So it's going to pull out the same emotion. I mean, basing last year was not bad. Display board is, we'll talk about it, but that's an area that we really, last year was essentially like a wooden TV tray with some foam, right? It was last minute.
That was my level display board.
I was embarrassed that I put my name on it, right? Now I will say, I think you were able to use it though for some other events. So that's good that it's been able to be repurposed. I didn't come into it going, I want to paint XYZ. What I did come with was like, I have a lot of models already, and I would like to maybe get rid of some of the backlog. So like, if we're interested in one of these armies that I already have, let's use that. And the fact when you floated, I think you floated Abyssals, right? Or maybe I floated it, but either way, like Night Stalkers and Abyssals are both evil armies. And we should have said when we talked about the event, if you used an evil and a good army, there's some seriously bad negatives that happen in the game in terms of you no longer you don't treat your opponent as a core part of your army. Was there any particular units that you were like, I really want to paint this?
Doppelgangers was the first unit I put in the list. I just knew the modeling opportunity
for good reason.
Good, and also
they ain't bad, by the way. Spoiler.
Yeah, they're good. So that probably my favorite unit in the army to use. I could see myself running a Night Stalker list with about 3 regiments or so. Soul Flayers are hard to leave at home. The models are great. I 3D printed ours, and they were fantastic. Bigger than I thought they were, actually. Those are huge models. The Butcher Plastics I love, so I wanted to get them in there as well. And we did need a centerpiece, so we basically looked at either the Terror or a Shadow Hulk, and we landed on Terror, which they're
the right
fantastic.
Choice. It was the right choice.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
What you're going to hear next is an excerpt from a brainstorming session that Dan and I had back on December 17th when we had already been talking a little bit. We talked about theme and, we were already having some initial conversations. But in this excerpt, you should really hear more about us fleshing out the theme of the story. And really, you already pretty much had your Night Stalker list. And there's some discussion about, what Abyssal units we should be taking. For context purposes, right when you start hearing the excerpt, we are, in the excerpt, scouring over the very first set of sketches that I did for basing and or a display board. Those are included in the show notes. That is included in the blog. If you're going to listen to the excerpt, which I think is around 30 minutes, pull it up. You'll basically be able to see us walk through that set of sketches. What I found interesting is listening back is realizing how many things we kind of said, these are great ideas, this is what I want to do, actually made it through the whole development process. We're going to cut away to the excerpt, and when we come back, we'll talk about the concepts that formed in that brainstorm and made it all the way through to the finished product.
Would it make sense to have multiple of those together, or do you feel like we need to
I don't know. I was thinking about that, so if we look through them, we've got books on a base, right? So you've got an open book that's the backdrop for the unit. Then you've got basically a closed hardcover book on the base, right? Or you have an open flat book. I think all 3 of those could work, even in the same side. We have to do it in a way where we tie them in, whether it's like with the type of binding or, there's probably a way to do it. Maybe the bigger question is like the vertical versus the flat, right? So this is a vertical thing. So you'd probably want to, if you're going to use this on some units, you're probably going to want to put that 2 units that are in the back of the display board, right? Because it'll block what's in front, right? And then when you get to, other options like the scroll, right? You could, I didn't draw it, but you theoretically could have a scroll that's a backdrop for the I don't know how cool that would be, honestly, but the play for the scroll or even the stack of papers is that it gives you the ability to maybe adjust to weirder shapes, like long, skinny, but like I said, I don't think this one would be particularly good if it's on a horde base maybe it could be multiple books, but like one book, it would be a weird looking book, right? Like
Yeah.
really long and skinny.
I didn't consider that, but no, that's a good point. For on a horde base, that's not like any book.
Yeah, and then you could potentially come up with your own custom type of book, like the monster manual, the monster book from Harry Potter, or the book from Evil Dead. I mean, we could do something like that too. That's probably my least favorite idea, but the other thing too is we can mix and match. We could maybe have some of our units are basically paintings, right? There's a base with which is essentially a frame. The art, the painting is coming off the base.
So. I actually kind of, it would just be for one, but what if we did that monster book, like the Necronomicon, as a blank base for the terror, and when it gets into combat, it's like the book opens up and you put the terror down.
Dude, like a pop-up book or something.
Yeah. So like that's a blank that we can use for it, and when he gets
a good idea.
You take it off and put the terror down, like it came out of the book.
The other question that I have when I look at these stuff is that when you look at a possible potential display board, right, like this, is it too much books? If there's a book on the base and then the base is in another book, I think it'll still work, but maybe try it out. I think the big giant book, or better yet, a stack of books with this open one on top, I think could be pretty sweet, right? You could actually cut into the pages, and actually drop the units in and have it all flush and everything. Because we're only talking about a small 2,000 point army, so
right. I like the book being the display board, other than the fact that I think if we go that route, we wouldn't be able to get away with using a lot of different kinds of books.
Yeah.
If we made it the display board more like a library and maybe do like a wooden floor with scrolls like littered all around, then we could have a ton of different type of books.
That's a good idea. So you could basically, or here's a crazy thought. What if it's a library table? And on that table are a bunch of open books.
Yeah, that could work.
You wouldn't even have to sink them in. You could just have them superficial. They could be just sitting on the table, right? The table.
What if we have the backdrop of the display, or even the actual display board was like a small bookcase or bookshelf, and we could have some units that have the book on them on the bookshelf, and then some on the display board. And it would be pretty modular.
You got me thinking about that now, because like now you're adding verticality to the thing. Yeah. It's like,
and you could move it around a little bit, so you could have some up in the shelf and some that fell down.
What if your backdrop was like some bookcases, but maybe in between them there's a desk, so you could have vertical and you can have horizontal, like you can have different options of how you orient the base. The thing about display boards is like once you remove them from the display board, there's always a concern that maybe the army doesn't match. But like if we're down with that, like the base itself, the base part could be part of the shelf, right? So it could have like wood planking, or it could be a piece of wood, right? Whereas so it makes it look like when it's sitting on there that it's like basically like an open book leaning up on the shelf.
And we could have some lore from like our armies in a book, an actual book, and put that book on the shelf, and then you pull the book off the shelf and you could read the lore.
We talked about lore, and we were like, one of the ideas was like, this is a children's book, right? Could it be that there's some researcher that wants to find out if this lore is real? Like, is it?
Oh, that angle's fun,
right? And so you're like, is it real? That would explain why he might have real books, like a Necronomicon or whatever that thing's called, from Evil Dead or a Monster Manual, because he's went to the library, Euclidean library from Panther. And he's pulled these references. And so it's a mix of real books. It's a mix of fairy tale books. And it's just like his research. There's no reason why we couldn't have there could be parchment. There could be scrolls, right? Because it's all part of, it's sort of like if you think about the scene from Lord of the Rings where Gandalf finds out about the ring, he goes to the library to research it. Like it's some, I think it's in Gondor, but I don't know. Like now, you got me thinking. Like, oh man, okay. Because now the books can be in scale. The researcher can be as big as us. Maybe not quite that big, because you don't want the books to be that big. But you make it in a way that the books that we're putting on our bases are in scale with the researcher, right? Whatever that is.
That would change what I was going to say a little bit, because it could kind of be interesting if we use, because we're going to have to make a large infantry hero that is a brawler. What if it was the brawler character who is the researcher?
Could be. Yeah, because originally I was thinking is we could have the brawler could be the child, right, that's being scared by it. Or it was the, in the sense of the guy that his town was, it was that guy that's like in a mental asylum. But yeah, it's the researcher. And he's maybe it's twisted his head around a little bit. I'm trying to think how we could physically tie that into. I mean, to be fair though, if this is if we come at this like we have a visual representation, but it's not a physical representation. It's actually in his mind. He's researching this thing, and when he pictures the research, this is what he's. So, like the fact that we have a researcher that might be out of scale, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's a problem. Like, it's fine.
What if the model was like shown sleeping on a desk in the library, and so the rest of the display board is his like nightmare of the Night Stalkers in the Abyss? Scale just be totally fine because it's way bigger.
Exactly,
it's a dream.
Yeah, because that's what we were talking about when we had the original idea of like having a person that had this nightmare of the torment of his city being destroyed. Same sort of thing, right? Like he's researched this stuff and now he's just like, oh my god, this is terrible.
Falling asleep, and then it all is coming real in his nightmare.
Yeah, it reminds me. You're probably not old enough to remember, but Super Mario Brothers 2 in the United States, the ending is Mario is asleep and the whole game was a dream. Anyways, that's a reference you probably don't get, but
nope, I've beaten 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, all right. Well, all right. Your cred went up a little bit. I think it's awesome, dude. My next step is to try to make some bases though, and actually see what we can do. There's tons of book 3D models, so that's an option.
Okay,
that's an option. Display board's going to be a desk. I need to draw some stuff out and think about that. It probably needs to be like a little wooden desk. Make it, figure it out. It could start off as like maybe like a TV tray or something. I don't know. There's probably a way like to start with it and then just put wood planking down to make the floor, and then maybe we have like I don't know. I gotta play with it and just see.
Yeah, understanding the scale of what we want to do is going to be. I think doing the dream thing and just tying that into the lore gives us a lot of wiggle room on the scale, but it's still going to have some credibility, even if we have leeway to make it bigger or smaller.
Well, yeah, but like if we had like just take an individual, the individual could be a little tiny book.
Could be,
and then yeah. I'm just starting to think to your point, like we've got to fit this on a display board, all these different units. We got like let's just say 15 units, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got to figure out how to make it all kind of sit together on a display
I think
board.
We're going to end up probably at, including the special character, 13 or 14 drops likely.
Right.
I'm hitting around 6, 5 at the minimum. I've had something between 5 and 7 for everything I've done, and it's probably going to be closer to 6, I bet.
Now that it's a dream in the guy's head, right? The researcher's head. Like there could also be like a big trap door in the middle of the floor. It's opened up and something's coming out of it. It doesn't even have to be a book. It could literally be a nightmare, a manifestation of a nightmare.
Yeah, and we just put a unit in that spot.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, if something crawling out.
Yeah,
I know you don't have Reapers or Tormentors in the list, but there may be something akin to that. Maybe Shadowhounds or Soul Flares, right? Like something's kind of coming out of the list.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the hobby aspect. I mean, I obviously want to be competitive, but I think if we've got just a really cool idea and it something works better over others, I'll lean towards what's going to look better and read better than how it plays on the table.
Man, there's some good ideas there.
Because I'm going to have to lean on you for the board and that display aspect. I can't believe you already mocked up all that stuff.
I'm one of those visual people. I can't just like, well, how am I going to do that? Well, let's draw it and see if it'll work. Once I do a couple bases, though, I think that's going to help too. I think it's going to help me figure out.
Yeah. I think if we go the library angle, I think the freedom to get really messy with like, this one's a scroll. And even if that's just like not something we use and it's just something we put on the display board, like a scroll that's kind of falling down from the bookshelf. I mean, you could have a knife on the table, right?
Oh yeah. That being said, because this is like an army that it's a mix of there's a children's story here where they're just scaring halfling children, right? But then there's maybe some real research and some maybe this army does exist. I guess is the theory. Maybe that's what you call it. Like, does this? Do we exist? Right?
Yeah.
That it's that playing against the two, the fairy tale versus reality.
Yeah.
What do the units look like? Are we gonna just have the unit straight up, or for example, and I don't think I like this idea, but I'm gonna throw it out there anyways. Like, are they torturing people? Like is the unit like maybe telling a story within its own base? I don't know.
Oh, so like leaning more into the diorama aspect of it. So like,
but on an individual basis, right? Like,
right.
Each unit is the diorama. Yeah, the whole thing is a big display board that's showing these books are becoming real. But individually, they might be telling different stories. That's a lot of work to figure that out.
I think if it makes sense for the unit, like I think in an infantry regiment or something like that, we would have maybe a bit more room to kind of tell that story. I already think we kind of know what we want to do with the doppelgangers. I think cutting up like maybe a halfling kit and mashing it with the scarecrow kit. Yeah. I think like using some, or maybe even abyss heads, just to kind of pull from both. And then, just
what model we got to use? Do you remember the Ronnie model? Ronnie the Bard?
Yeah.
The one where he's half human and half missile?
I've not seen that one.
He's got like a half of his face is like in a lower abyssal, and then it's a human. You could tell.
We could use that in the, we could use that as a horror or in the doppelganger unit.
That's sort of goes right to the heart of what we're trying to describe, is that like the human side is like the fairy tale maybe, and maybe the abyssal side is like, it's reality. We definitely could use that
if we really want to do the terror, which I think, so just thinking about the way the list crosses over, the terror makes a ton of sense.
If we want something big and gribbly in the abyssal list, but we don't want to pay 300 points, we can take the unwinged version, the Fiend, right? Was it called Archfiend?
Yeah. And with regen, that's like 190.
Yeah, because 20 points, 195.
Yeah.
So that might be like a budget one.
And I think we're going to kind of be forced into the budget ones, assuming we want to do the terror. Yeah. I think we can only
he's almost 300 points.
He's 245 or 240.
Question we'll have to decide is we need some throwaway infantry, right? So I'm assuming we probably want some gargoyles, maybe, or not. You have phantoms. I don't know. Like
phantoms are even better. If we want to go that route, we totally could. Or you have tortured souls, which kind of do both, and they could benefit from my aura. It's only 9 attacks because we'd have to take the regiment, but still it'd be 9 on 3s, which is in a flank terrible. Is 18 on 3s, which can do a lot of damage. And they've got life leech. They've got some things going for them.
You said something though. If we can take a living legend, is the lady still around that gives you D3 brutal?
Oh, Matibusu?
But that's pretty cool, right? Brutal D3, right?
Oh, man. Brutal D3 is amazing. And she's 160. That's super reasonable.
And I have a model. She flies, right? So I have like a model, a resin cast from Mantic that is supposed to be like an abyssal champion with wings. Well, I mean, we have the Monster model. I have that model too, right? Because she was like a Helpy's Rift character or something. So I have that model too. I don't know, like that'd be kind of cool. She's an individual, which
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for the points, the better unit is the Seductress with the Gnome Glass Shield for defense 6, but she doesn't get the brutal D3. So,
Seductress already has wings.
Yeah,
and the Gnome Glass Shield's what, 5 points or 10 points?
It's 10. So
it would be 140.
Yeah, comes with duelists too, so really could help us against individuals. Yeah, honestly, the Seductress is the best model, maybe the best model on the abyssal list with the Gnome Glass Shield for the points. Snare defense 6. I mean, that's
exactly. Well, I was thinking about like, do we want to bring like Succubi? Maybe we can upgrade them to like Pathfinder, right, with Wild Charge D3 for 20 points.
Succubi for their points, I really don't dislike succubi at all.
It's just the defense 3 makes me nervous, but
yeah, but stealthy and snare,
but stealthy and snare and fury. I don't know.
Yeah, they don't regen though, which is
right. And that's if we're playing into that, then it's really Abyssal Guard and lower abyssals, right? We could potentially have a regiment of Abyssal Guard to provide the rally.
If we lean into the Abyssal Guard and we take the Harbinger, who has the
Rampage 3?
Yes, the Rampage 3. That gives those regiments 15 attacks, hitting on 3s. You can even look at maybe doing Crushing 1 and dropping the defense to 4 and adding the Sacrificial Imp. So if there's a shooting list, we aren't as worried
or you also force charge them, right? To make a hit on 2s.
Exactly.
They'll be tough to deliver unhindered.
And that's kind of the problem.
Is ferocious charge just mean an unhindered charge? So a counter charge would work, right?
That is a great question.
Let's see. Unless disordered. So we would be disordered.
Yeah, they'd be disordered. Correct. Okay.
On a turn in which the unit makes an unhindered charge to receive +1 to hit modifier. Man, that would catch somebody out, though. 15 attacks on 2s?
Yeah.
They're only, crush 1, though, I guess is the concern, right?
If you lower them to defense 4, crush 1.
Oh, so there's no crushing.
I kind of like adding a Bane Chant in the list, and I think if you do it, I think you do go the Harbinger route with the loot. I mean, it's also very inspiring. They can take
65 points.
Yeah, it's cheap. Price is right. I mean, if we're thinking from the perspective of what does a list need to win, I think we need to get close to at 2,000 points. The math changes a little bit. I think we're going to need at a minimum 13 drops. We need to limit individuals because every unit strength is important. I think we probably need to look at having we need enough. We need 3 to 4 hammers, I would say, that are decent, and then we definitely need an anvil or 2. I'm having a tougher time on the Abyssal side of the list, probably just because I'm not as familiar with it. Quickly going through it, I think there is some play if we went, with the infantry and the Harbinger.
The Abyssal Guard are reason. I mean, I think they're reasonably priced. If we're giving them an extra 3 attacks, they got 15 attacks at -16 with regen 5+. And if you're going to 165 for a unit, now you've got vicious, and now you're -17. Which
that is an upgrade. So I bet we could probably take that, or at least use the one that could be our 1 if we're not taking anything else.
Right.
I could take a horror and give infantry vicious anyway.
So we wouldn't even really need that if you're bringing in a horror with vicious.
I mean, if we do go the vicious route from the horror, we could look at lower abyssals with the hammer of measured force is not a terrible option.
No, 20 points. I mean, we're leaning into it.
And adding vicious in there makes that not terrible.
Exactly. Wounding on 4s, re-rolling 1s.
But you're averaging 8 hits, give or take, on 5s. 4. That's not a ton of damage.
No, because a third of those would be hit. So what?
They're a better anvil than a hammer.
8.5, something like that. So maybe 8, 9 hits.
Another model I noticed that is pretty crazy is the Berserker Apostate.
The individual Berserker model.
Yeah, he's got 8 attacks.
Pretty sweet models. He's 165 points though, but he's got unit strength, which is a good thing. He's got unit strength. He gives vicious to the other berserkers. Can we take formations? No, we don't want the Nagari. Never mind. I was just thinking because the formation is 2 abyssal regiments, and then you get Thunder Charge 1, which is not terrible. Yeah, and abyssal berserkers, if we did go the regiment route, could benefit from ferocious charge, which would give 15 attacks on 3s, so 10 hits with crushing 1 and vicious. Not bad. And they're speed 9, right? They're speed 9, nimble, 140 points, 145 if you give them the imp. Which you probably have to do, right? Because they're defense 4, I think. 100%. Yeah, your list is trickier to. Well, it almost seems like we just need to lock your side down, whatever you want to do, and then we just need to use the forces of the abyss to support the Night Stalkers, however that is. So whatever you're missing from your doppelgangers, are kind of like stealth hammers, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
They're going to try to avoid getting. Oh, so how does that work? If you doppelgang, you get their number of attacks.
Yes.
And their melee value, but you don't get their special rules.
Correct.
Right? So if I give you Rampage 3, that adds to the value?
Yes. It's pretty sweet. And I'm telling you, with Ferocious Charge on them is great. And they're 145 points.
Yeah, so if you Ferocious Charge into like Soul, this isn't going to happen, but Soul Reaver Infantry.
Yeah. Hitting on 2s. Crushing 2.
With Rampage 3.
With Rampage 3.
And Vicious, probably.
And Bane Chan access if we go that route.
That's so tasty. It is so tasty.
And the thing is, it's like you're not, a lot has to go right, but everything is still good if even if
it doesn't go right. Doppelgangers are hard to get rid of, man. They're not expensive in the grand scheme of things.
I do think we need to take one regiment of Soul Flayers for, their good
Wind Blast
for one. They have Wind Blast. Mm-hmm. And with Blood of the Old King, that's 15 points. They go up to 180 points with that. But it's 12 attacks, access to Ferocious Charge. So they could be hitting on 2s with Elite and Vicious for 180 points.
I like it, dude.
You're averaging like 11 point something hits.
Yeah.
In the front.
We have a lot of regen, and you've got the planar apparition with the heal 7. It's like, that's...
And that has Radiance of Life, too. We can't leave that up. It's just too good for 100.
Oh, I just want to cast... Reroll your terror regen rolls. That's what I want to do. You're already regen 4. It's like, okay, I took 9 wounds. Roll it. Okay, roll it again.
That's kind of why. So my list is kind of getting locked in. I don't think we can leave the doppelgangers out. It's too good. The Soul Flayers for 180 points. I don't know how we leave that out with Blood of the Old King. 11 hits to the front of anything with, a 2-point swing is...
Your second list that's got Butchers. Can't really go wrong with Butchers, dude. Let's just be honest. 16, 18, they're just solid.
And Large Infantry, they're gonna look good, painted up.
The Horror, he might be an expensive version because it was 80 points when you give him Bane Chant. And you gave him the scope. But he's giving you Vicious. So that's like, if we're leaning in
that list, I couldn't afford the Vicious.
Okay. Well, I'm just wondering, though, like, if we're going to lean into infantry, which I'm not saying we need to, but, like, if we are, then that's a thing, right? Like, Vicious Aura can potentially be, on Doppelgangers, right? Doppelgangers are only 145 points, and they're 15, 17 nerve?
Yeah.
I almost think you got to take 2 of them. I don't know how you do that, but golly.
Yeah, because here's the thing: at 2,000 points, people are more likely to take units that put in a lot of work. If we were going for just a straight win, I think I probably do take 2 regiments.
To be fair, if you took 2 regiments, it would give you the ability to have maybe one where it was like halflings converting, and then maybe it's a human thing.
Let's see that.
You probably want the planar, right? Like 150 points there. I agree with you. You probably want the Soul Flayers. The Butchers are the question, I guess, then.
I wouldn't have enough unlocks, unfortunately.
Right. Because the Doppelgangers, they unlock, though, right?
They do.
But the Butchers unlock
2, which is what we need.
You want the Terror and the Terror and the Hero there. So you got 1, 2, and 2.
Yeah, I need 3 unlocks, and I only have 2. You could trade the Soul Flayers for another regiment of Doppelgangers.
I think the Soul Flayer models would look dope as hell. Maybe just go with 1 Doppelganger horde. It's 1 Doppelganger regiment. Not the end of the world.
Yeah, it's not. That last list I sent you, I think is actually pretty...
Yeah, Doppelgangers, Butchers, Soul Flayers, Mind Screech, Terror, and Horror. And from a hobby perspective, you're not doubling up on anything. So you have the ability... And you could have the Horror, could be the Ronnie the Bard model, whatever that is, could be the one converting the Doppelgangers, like converting the halflings.
Yeah,
right?
I do like that. One thing we will have to consider is we're talking so much about the command dice aspect of it. You're going to have to end up taking
We'll spend some extra points. I mean, we're gonna get. I don't know if we're gonna have. I'm assuming we're gonna have just one set to share.
Yes, and the special character will give one as well, so we can get there. You're just
well, that's already 4, and probably just need to buy a couple red, and we'll be okay. I think.
Yeah, right? I think so. The question is the horror. I mean, if you're going to go the Bane chant route, I wouldn't have to do that on my end.
Well, I guess it depends on, are we going into a melee heavy, or an infantry list to lean into Vicious and Rampage 3? Then we can do that, right? And then it probably makes sense for the Harbinger and to give him the loot.
Yeah, I could go with something else.
I mean, the Vicious Aura is not bad, right? Like, I mean, it's a solid, and he's got a spell, right? You gave him, well, you haven't given Bane Champ, but does he have anything else?
He could do Weakness or Lightning Bolt.
You know how much I hate Weakness.
To get Vicious in the list, I'd have to make some adjustments.
The Vicious is good because you could throw that on the Doppelgangers, right? And if we did that, then I don't have to, well, I mean, I'm getting an extra plus. For 15 points, I'm getting an extra pip of Nerve and Vicious, but I don't really need the Vicious if you've got Vicious. Right?
Right.
So it's just a question of, is an extra pip of Nerve worth 15 points? But if we went that route, we said boom and boom.
There is a question of, you can only take it once, and that would probably be that might take our one living legend slot. I don't know if we care about that or not.
I'm wondering if we don't bother taking it.
I think we can get away without it on that one.
And then if we took a horde of lower abyssals, I'm just curious here. We're at half my points in 3 units. And then we talked about the Harbinger. I guess we would give him the loot?
Yeah.
We have the Terror. The Terror is Rampage. Everything we've got is all about killing cavalry and infantry models. Do we need something to fight high defense and or big Gerberlies like ogres?
Yes.
And what would that be?
My Soul Flayers
Butchers
can definitely do it. Butchers can do it. I mean, big Griblies, the Doppelgangers in theory can do it. They take the crushing, a lot of that stuff has the crushing strength.
You're at exactly 1,000, right? So.
Yeah, and that's without having the Vicious Aura.
Oh, because how many points was that?
It's 30. It's a lot.
Ooh, maybe we just don't worry about Vicious.
Thinking out loud, we're probably going, if I don't take the horror, what else could I use the points for? I mean, it could be a Scarecrow Regiment, which is some unit strength, or a Regiment of Needle Fangs, but they're not.
The Swarms?
Yeah.
I wouldn't hate on getting a Butcher character, right? Those guys are pretty badass too, right?
Oh, I'd love to get a Flesh Ripper in there. I just don't know where the points come from.
How many points is he? 100 something?
Like 120. Yeah, so I can't quite.
I mean, how much unit strength do you have in your list right now? You've got 11, and I'm at 725 points. If you want, I could probably get 16 unit strength in this list relatively easily.
Yeah. I think at 2,000, we need to be around the 23, 24 mark.
You've got 11 in your list?
Yeah. Because the standard 2,300 probably sits 24 to 26. So,
I mean, would that bias anything if we had like a ton of unit strength?
Pending scenario, it would. It's always
the problem is if we're giving up mobility, right, for a bunch of like big lumbering hordes to get the extra unit strength. I guess the other thing too is we don't really want to. If it's a hobby army, we don't really want to have like a bunch of the same type of units, right? We want to mix it up and showcase some cool stuff. Different demons.
I would love to sneak. Yeah, we definitely do want to do that. I would love to sneak a Butcher Flesh Ripper in here, actually. Let's see. But yeah, there's just the points aren't there. The Terror just takes up so much. I think we need to take it.
I mean, honestly, dude, a horde of lower abyssals is 160 versus an Abyssal Guard regiment, which is 150. Like,
yeah.
I mean, we could lean into lower abyssals and just, it's pretty resilient. Defend, I know it's regen 5+, but you can have it rerollable. So I don't know, maybe something we have to think about and just, what, I guess it depends on what kind of army we want to do. Like, you've got your Soul Flayers. I mean, maybe it makes sense to have some Tortured Souls to go with them, right? Like, all right, here we come, like a regiment.
Maybe I need to let it sit for a while, but I'm kind of stuck.
Yeah, you do. Because I mean, the butchers are standard, dude. Like every person running Night Stalkers effectively has got like a couple hordes, or maybe even 3 hordes of butchers, because they're good, dude. Yeah, they hit on force, but they have crushing strength too, which is kind of the magic number. And then the fact that they're 16-18 with fury and stealthy.
Yeah, I also just thought about, but it's taking 2 individuals. But the Rampage aura would work on the Seductress, so she'd get 8. Yeah. Oh,
the Seductress is what, like 130. Oh, it's pretty pricey though. 130 points, but she would kill the shit out of an individual, man. Because if you get it, I mean, I don't know how you would get it, but if you had Rampage 3 on it and she was 8, she was 8 attacks going to 24. That could be my centerpiece model.
Yeah, the problem in this list is if I take the horror, you want to go with the vicious horror, but I just don't have the. I mean, it would have no spells, and a horror with no spells is stupid. But I'm just at a weird. There's not much to do with 80 points. There's like nothing to do with 80 points. The horror might be a trap.
The Seductress model or a flying succubus could be sweet, regardless, right? Like it could be like. I mean, even though it's a small model, we could put it on a big ass plinth or a big base, like a stack of books. You know. Yeah. I mean, playing with the size, we could go with like dollhouse books, right? And she's standing on a stack, like just to play with the scale on things.
Yeah,
you know,
I do.
It's almost like Alice in Wonderland. All right, man. Well, I got my marching orders. You're gonna start working on paint schemes, right? And then we'll adjourn shortly.
Sounds like a plan.
So hopefully that wasn't too terrible for people to listen to. You know, Dan, I was thinking about some of the ideas that we brought up and kind of started to formulate in that first brainstorming session. And some of them did make it all the way to the end. I think in my mind, there's 4 things. The first one is, like I mentioned, your list was pretty solid. Doppelgangers were in there. Butchers were in there. When we had that first session, you kind of already knew what you wanted in the list.
With Night Stalkers, I had a much better idea of what direction I wanted to go than with the Abyss half. Night Stalkers are a great list. You can build them a lot of ways. It's hard to go wrong, really. My only concern was, does it all fit in 1,000? And the most difficult bit was really the horror at the end, which I think Weakness was a great addition to our list and helped us out a lot. So I'm glad we took it. But those last 80 to 100 points were a little tricky to fill. But other than that, it fit like a glove. Yeah, it was basically exactly what I wanted.
We had a lot of discussion about what we would put in the Abyssal list. In the excerpt, what comes across is that we wanted the Abyss to support what we had in the Night Stalkers. If it was additional unit strength we needed, if it was more command, whatever we thought we were missing, like Seductress, you got to have that, right? Like that's a great support piece, regardless of what you're playing with. The other 3 things that, for me, came across in the brainstorming session that came all the way through to the end are related to the aesthetic and the theme. You know, we had lots of conversations about, essentially, this is the army inside someone's head. Visualized on the table, physical armies coming out of books. The books themselves would be detailing the unit that is standing on them. So, for example, on the Succubi, it lays out a map of the Abyss, and then it goes into detail on what the 3rd circle is, which is the home for the Succubi. I thought that was interesting that was like such a early idea. And it not only survived, it actually grew and expanded. We really ran with it. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the theme?
Love the theme. Even on our Bowen model, I asked him what books he'd been reading or what his favorite books were. And we integrated that into, him being the librarian, standing on books that are flying. And so we integrated books that he'd read recently or liked into that actual model. So it really did carry over from Night Stalkers to Abyss to even our extra character. That theme was consistent, and consistency with the theme was really our number one driver for this project. We didn't want anything to feel out of place, and I think that bit we nailed.
And I guess the other 2 things I would mention is, obviously we just talked about books, right? There's a theme, which is books, scrolls, parchment, paper, and that is through the whole army. And then the display board, we were thinking maybe it's like a giant book. But then we're like, well, that might be books and books. There's too many books. The bases are the books. Where would books sit? I think it was you that said, well, maybe we should have a bookshelf and a table. Relatively quickly after that first session, where we were brainstorming, I threw out a sketch where it's like a small bookshelf with 3 or 4 shelves and a small table. It's a little room.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, I was like, that is nuts. Never done a display board that had such verticality, almost a 2-foot tall display board. When I think about theme, I'm always like, am I playing in Panathor? Is this consistent with Panathor? Does it make sense? This was a leap of faith for me. Man, this is weird. Like, it's in this dude's head. Weird. It's a visual representation of what he's got in his head. We'll talk about our background story, which actually makes it more clear that, no, actually, maybe the books are portals. I don't know about you, but I'm usually making an army that's on, like, some landscape that's based in Panathor.
Oh, yeah.
I'm always trying to make it look like this is an army that's on the march somewhere in Panathor. And this was such a departure. But you know what? I like the leap. I don't know about you. I just thought, man, let's just go. We're gonna go all in, creative, and I think it paid off.
Now, when I saw your sketches of the library, the book, and the table, I knew that if we were able to hit near that, we would have success.
And success for us was we want to win Best Painted, right? You know,
that was it.
To be fair, there's a lot of Blue City guys and a lot of people that show up at this event. Ryan Smith, a classic example, right? They come with the best hobby every year. Last year, I thought we did an okay job, but I think we were feeling it out. Like, okay, how committed are we? We were like 4 toes in, but this time it's like whole leg. It's whole, you know what I mean? Yeah. That's why I felt.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Well, let's get into the execution. We're going to cut away to our background story, which Dan wrote. So we'll be right back.
A nameless librarian from a secret order known only as the Watchers flies to a seemingly insignificant halfling town. The librarian has been researching ley lines and areas of power. A Watcher knows power can be found where you least expect it. He comes to warn them that their town is on a nexus of power and is gleaming like a beacon for those with the eyes to see it. Areas of power while making harvests boom, injuries heal faster, and raising heroes from common folk do have a drawback. Areas of power can be a doorway should one possess the key. The librarian gets to town late, so he stays at the inn so he can meet with the town mayor in the morning, for there is much to be done. In the inn, there is a mysterious bard who is playing an eerie lullaby. The librarian sits in the back of the room as he pulls out his books and goes over his research one last time before his meeting. The librarian finds his eyelids becoming heavy, and he and the few other patrons fall asleep at the table listening. The librarian has terrible nightmares of the town being overrun, creatures leaping out of the pages of his books. But then his nightmare is shattered by the screams. Twisted monsters burst out of his books in the real world. He narrowly ducks the scythe of a hooded creature on horseback and scurries out the door. The librarian goes outside and sees the transformation of the bard, who is no longer human. The bard, shifting mouth agape as a chant erupts from his throat. A blue streak tears across the ground, making a hellish rune, and hell itself appears. The souls of the damned fly out in front of a legion of horned demons. The Watcher sees that the town is lost and flies to the next town to warn them of the coming threat. As he flies, he sees monsters slowly shifting into the form of halflings. They wave goodbye as the librarian flees into the distance.
Theme was maybe there would be kind of a secret organization that is keeping tabs on the Night Stalkers and the Abyss. And basically, this librarian has been doing some research, and he's finding concerning trends, and these ley lines or areas of power converged on this halfling town, so he's going there to warn them. But in doing so, he falls asleep in that area, and the Night Stalkers and Abyss are able to burst forth, in part due to that, and also in part due to a Ronnie the Bard that has turned bad, which we actually had the model for, which is really cool.
I think that idea of a society of watchers has legs.
I do too. I enjoyed that.
Maybe that's a through thread that goes through maybe future projects for us.
I was pretty proud of that. That was one of the areas of the project I was most proud of, was the story behind it.
All right, well, let's talk about our list. You know, Dan, you want to walk us through the Night Stalkers? Because I think it's fair to say the Night Stalkers got locked down a lot faster than we did with the Abyssals.
We had a regiment of doppelgangers, and we did take elite on them, which I liked because it's a discounted item for a regiment. And boy, I won't spoil it, but they had their day in the sun with elite. It was great. Then we had a horde of butchers. We had a regiment of soul flayers. They come with Windblast. The Terror is amazing. We had the Planner Apparition version of the Mind Screech, so Heal 7 and Mind Fog 2. We had the Horror, which was our mutated Ronnie the Bard, and he had Weakness 2 with the Conjurer's Staff, which I wasn't sure about if I liked that in the list, but I think hindsight, it was actually a pretty good decision.
There are no conversions in this army. They're all just straight models. We were able to use the transforming Ronnie the Bard model where he's half abyssal, half human. And the fact that we took a little wanted poster and put it on his base, that just makes me smile every time. I just, so creative.
To be fair, the doppelgangers were actually pretty heavily converted.
Okay, sorry, you're right. I don't want to short shift you there.
I worked hard on that. Yeah, so we had the regular doppelganger models in the back, which used to be the old Spectre kit, slowly melding into the Halfling Brave kit. So if you look in the middle of the unit, they are about 50-50 mix, and then the one in the very front is almost he actually might be entirely Halfling, but he's painted with the kind of desaturated pale green skin that the regular doppelgangers have to still make him eerie.
The best part of that unit, though, was that where you had a sketch, like a researcher sketch of a doppelganger, you actually had doppelganger arms. Like it was coming, literally, like there's a sketch and it's coming out of the book. I thought that was so much fun.
It was my favorite unit in the list. I found it a lot of fun to use and model and paint. It was the most fun I had, probably.
Well, we'll talk about the basic in a minute, but like it had a very evocative base because it had a large book that was open and set off askew to the corner. Mm-hmm. It was unique. Like it literally had a backdrop for the unit, which is really cool. That's the Night Stalker bits, right? So in terms of the Abyssal side, we had 2 regiments of Tortured Souls. We did have Succubi.
The Succubi did have Blood of the Old King.
We had Abyssal Guard. They were upgraded to the Oathbreakers, and they got Brew of Strength. And then we did have a Horde of Lower Abyssals. We ended up with Pipes of Terror because when we went to submit our list, that was when we figured out that we couldn't buy an extra die. So we had like an extra 10 points, and that's what ended up happening. So worthless. It would have been better to take anything else. I think they fought one combat, maybe, the entire event. The Abyssal side did have a couple characters. We talked about the aforementioned Seductress with the glass shield. And then we had a Harbinger that had the Loot of Insatiable Darkness, the Rampage 3 Malay aura. That's why we took it, right?
Came into play occasionally, but not a lot.
The Succubi kind of were underwhelming for me. Like, the Abyssal Guard were great. There were times where we shoved those guys down people's throats.
Yeah.
I like being aggressive. But with the Succubi, like, they are only defense 3. I know they're stealthy. They got taken off a few times in quick order. But you know what? We're hobby guys. And I wanted to paint Succubi.
Hobby guys. Probably my favorite painted unit in our list, if I have to be honest, was the
Succubi. The models are really good. I mixed in some of the resin models. Then we also had a Brawler model, which we used the Jarvis model. We added some creativity and a little spin by him flying on some books. He had this stack of books that were levitating, basically. I think that the cool thing there was we committed to the bit. So Bowen is a real person. Our character is called Chris Owen in an homage to his persona on Facebook. And he is a Miami Dolphins fan, which is absolutely clear from the paint scheme that you chose to use. So he's the one model that's a little bit different than everybody else. For him, it had to be the perfect Bowen, if you will.
Yeah.
To be fair, it's the only model we no longer own because it was gifted to Bowen with much glee and satisfaction. I think Bowen was giddy as a little kid in a candy store when you gave him the model. So
I know he's going to take good care of it.
He's got a lot of your armies, as I recall. I remember a young, 16-year-old kid coming into the shop one time, and I need money, guys. $200. Here's a Chaos Army. I remember that a few times. And then being disappointed that I was 5 minutes too late. I'm like, damn, Bowen, you beat me to it.
Yeah. 100%.
So that's kind of models and the units that we had in our list. We'll just touch on basing, as again I alluded to before. We have a blog. It goes into a lot of detail. Just like Dan talking about paint, you have a question that didn't get answered from either our discussion today or from our blogs. let me know. I'm happy to talk. And in general, Dan, with the blogs, we try to make them accessible. We're not doing the heavy metal thing where it's like, well, now there's 15 layers of, we didn't do any of that. We just said broad strokes. These are the paints we use, the materials we use, and kind of the process that we use. Because I think the biggest thing we did was we took a leap of faith and we stuck our neck out there and we just, all right, let's try this. Let's see if it works. It could have backfired. It could have been like, this is dumb.
Yeah, it could have
little segue, Dan. I did this before where I did a leap of faith and I fell down the chasm. So there was a Warhammer event that Gibney and I went to one year called Wapaka. It was in the middle of Wisconsin. And I did a beautiful Chaos Army, Zeech Chaos Army. My leap was that I did obsidian basing. So everything is like highly polished black basing. Really, the painting sucked. Like it was just like sharp black, glossy black rock. I had this crazy display board with like jagged, like almost like shards. It didn't pay off, I guess is what I'm saying. So sometimes when you jump, sometimes the pool is empty and it's not a soft landing. So for those that look at the pictures, there's two things about the basing. There's wood planking that was put down on the bases itself. And then there were books, parchments, scrolls, those kind of things that on the basing in different orientations, closed books, open books, rolled scrolls, that kind of thing that, kind of enhanced, and supported the theme. The first thing I had to do back in December was figure out how the hell I'm going to make these books, right? As you see on the blog, I tried like actually making them out of paper. I tried foam core. I tried cork. It all didn't work. I thought about for a minute, well, maybe I'll use epoxy sculpt. And I was like, I'm not sculpting these things like that. So I ended up using Sculpey, which, again, we talked about James Wapple. He's a huge fan of Sculpey. Mm-hmm. Sculpey and a pasta press. Voila, I'm able to make pages.
Who knew?
It's the perfect basing for an engineer because there were some little accents that I sculpted, like a lock or a, that kind of thing. But like by and large, it's rolling out the paper, cutting it to size, baking it, and just doing that a bunch of times, adding a cover and adding some straps. Head over to the blog. You'll see all kinds of concepts, materials that we tried. You'll see my first passes, which I used like whatever I had on hand, black or dark brown. And eventually I realized, no, I'd rather have like a parchment color Sculpey because that way, if the paint did chip, it's already that right tone underneath. And I also thought like it'll make everything consistently the color would all be the same underneath, and so it'd make painting easier. And knowing that some of these were going to be just painted parchment color like a scroll, like I didn't want to use black because that would take a lot to cover it up and to add the base colors and stuff. So go to the blog. You'll see, I basically designed a book for an infantry regiment base, and figured out the size. It's roughly a quarter scale. That's probably not right on, but it's roughly that. And then from there, I designed different sizes for different things. With the scrolls, there's no rhyme or reason. I just went with what looked cool. Like I would take into account how wide the bases were. Yeah, we talked about this, is that the difficult parts with some of the bases were weird shaped. Tortured Souls, for example. Mm-hmm. They're not deep enough at 40 millimeters to really put a book on it. Not a book that's in scale with everything else. Had to have something else to keep the theme going of parchment, scrolls, and that kind of thing. So yeah, you'll see that we've got lots of different books. For me, the best, coolest model in the whole army is the planar apparition, right? We have the wooden base, but we have a vertical scroll. You cut the Mind Screech, so he's literally protruding out magically out of the scroll, and it's all standing. God help me if we ever drop it, right? Like it'll shatter him. The Mind Screech
he's done.
And the Sculpey is very not friendly to drop it. So for me, that's the best. And then I guess I should mention the wood. The wood texture was super easy to do. It was just 16th inch planking that was a 1/2 inch wide balsa wood. And it just strips and strips and strips. Now I did have to pivot. I literally bought Mid-South Hobbies out of every piece of balsa wood at that size they had. Every piece. So I had to go to 1 inch, and then I had to figure out to we'll draw a line down the middle and we'll pretend it's 2 pieces. And so it was a whole thing. But painting was super easy. The wood is just like dark brown, right? Earth brown, spray paint. Added some raw umber, little dry brush of, very light dry brush of burnt sienna and Bob's Your Uncle. And, Dan, thank you. You hooked me up with my very favorite matte spray in the history of all things.
AK Ultra Matte Varnish. Used it for years. We'll never use anything else.
And the fact that you can brush it on or airbrush it, it's unbelievable. And we should say the reason why we had to have some serious matte spray is because when we get to the painting section, after the oil paint's dry, you really need to spray it with matte to even, if you pick up an oil painted model and you turn it, it's so glossy, it's like hitting me in the eye, the reflections. You've gotta cut the shine down.
Yeah.
Just to keep the paint job going. So.
You have to.
In terms of the books, all the parchment and pages were all painted the same using an airbrush and army painter. And then the covers were all painted with triads. And again, you'll see a lot of pictures on the blog. I highly recommend doing that. But we weren't done there. If we would have stopped there, people would have been like, that's a pretty cool base. But we were going all in. And so to go all in meant we needed to have text on these books that was, first of all, in scale with the book, but also it tells the story of the unit that it's standing on. My one kind of like disappointment, Dan, is that all I have is the pictures now, because if you look at the unit, you can't read half the text because there's models all over it, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we should have taken some pics before models went on.
Well, I have pics, and they're in the blog. If you want to see what the artwork looks, yeah, because most of it's text.
Okay.
But there is some illustration, like you did some illustration on the Doppelganger book. I've got a map of the Abyss that I did it in ink, and then we watercolored over top, or I watercolored over top. It was a complicated process. It was a lot of work to do that. Like, that might have been the hardest step of all of it, making a little template to make sure you're writing in straight and stuff. But what do you think about when you look back at the basing? I mean, for me, that's what sold the whole theme. Like the fact that we executed that and delivered 100%.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned, just to kind of circle back to your favorite base being the Planner Apparition. That was the first one we had based. And it was the one, and I also painted it up. So it was basically fully painted. Seeing that come out the way it did made me very excited to finish the rest of them. It kind of gave us that extra, or at least for me, that motivation, seeing, okay, here's our concept. It looks amazing. Let's knock the rest of this out so, we can take it home.
I love the
that's
fact,
probably my favorite base as well.
The other thing about that finished unit that I really love was it actually is a throwback to one of our throwaway concepts, which was originally we had thrown away. We had the idea that maybe we have this fairy tale book, and it's really designed to scare halfling children. Remember this? We had that idea, and this would be like, you have Night Stalkers attacking their mind, and maybe the Abyssals are attacking their body, but really it's a fairy tale. And the fact that you did like a Once Upon a Time, you could tell on the scroll that's behind the planer, like. I love that because it's a nod.
I really wanted to do, just when we were thinking of the project, you picture these, Grimm's fairy tale book where the V or the T and the is like very stylized and has a lot of artwork around it. We were running a bit out of time, so I didn't have time to go as crazy into that as I wanted to, but I did want something that had a different, unique font that we hadn't done anywhere else in the army. I wanted to throw that in somewhere. And that was just the most obvious place to do it. And I like the way it turned out.
Well, let's talk about the display board, because that is a big piece of the army itself. If you go over to our blog, you'll see the first time I sketched out like what we were talking about dimension wise, 24 by 24 thing. You've got a little shelf and a little table. And it's really funny because if you look at the final product, it looks very similar to that. Like the number of shelves might be different because I think there's 4 shelves or 3 shelves, like it really close to what we did. And then from there, I took the sketch and I put it into CAD and just kind of played it. I played around. I remember this part where I made you measure all the heights of all the units so I would know how tall they were with.
That was a fun,
Yes, because I'm like,
fun night trying to balance everything with a picture and a tape measure. And
well, because there's 2 things I wanted to make sure we were doing. I wanted the army to be intermixed on the board. The second thing is like heights with like heights, right? Like so. And also, when they're designing the shelves, like I need to know how tall they were. I think they ended up being 6 inches tall, maybe, the space between the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
The display board itself, it's all Home Depot, right? Like go to Home Depot, buy a piece of plywood, cut it up. If you could buy doll furniture at that scale, I would have done it. They don't have anything like that. Because to be fair, even though it does look pretty realistic, the proportions are wrong. Because the shelves are deeper than a real bookshelf would be, because we needed real estate for, different depths of basing. But I think at some point we also realized we wanted to have a book backdrop. So there's books behind the units. Like, a normal bookshelf might only hold like 1.5 deep of books, whereas we're like 2 or 3 deep of books on our shelves. So yeah. So basically what I did was I made a table and I made a bookshelf. Then I took a board and I laid wood planking down to give it the sense of, like a wooden floor. And that used 1 inch wide basswood because I couldn't get the stuff. I was out. Like, this is all I could get. And to be fair, it's nice because it makes it look a little bit different. The shelves and the tabletop were all done exactly like we did with the basings, the same thickness and everything. And so what's cool is, even though we didn't integrate, we talked about this, like, do we want to cut it in and have the units sitting in, like, in a groove? The more I thought about it, the more I didn't want to mess with that. Number one, it's a lot more work, but number two, it limits where we can put stuff, because
it's a lot more work.
You got to lock yourself in too, right? Like, this has got to go here.
Yeah.
If you add stuff down the road, it limits you. But just having the exact same wood, exact same paint job underneath the base, which is on the base, I think it works. And then the floor, it's not as textured. It's much more smooth. It looks like an oak floor or something. It's real stain, and I added some little nails to just give it the accent, the look. Again, the floor's not very big because we weren't going to put anything on the floor except for maybe a unit under or two underneath the table. So we didn't really need that real estate. Yeah, painting wise, it's wood. So it's a lot of stain. It's some brown paint, like where there's texture, it's painted just like the basing with the raw umber, burnt sienna, dry brush. The only thing I did that I wish I wouldn't have done is I bought, like, to make the legs of the table, I bought like this pre-poly sealed, like, banister. It's wood, but like there's like this plastic coating over it. It made painting it impossible. Like, I wish I would have just bought a wooden banister and it would have been a lot better off, but lessons learned. Painted it all up. We did mount little L brackets behind the bookshelf and the table to lock it down so that when you're moving the cart around, because it's on this big cart, same cart that I used for my salamanders, that it wouldn't fall over. Because the bookshelf is it's like 2 feet, 18 inches, something like that. It's pretty tall.
On the cart, it's taller than me. It's not, low bar, but still.
Yeah, for sure. So once we have the display board kind of finished, then we added a wall. I don't know where that idea came from, but it just felt right that we would have, because we weren't using the full depth of the board, like, it made sense to have like a backdrop. And so I just took a piece of I tried all kinds of stuff, but I ended up with just a thick piece of foam core, black, which it took airbrushing well. It curled on me a little bit. So I had to put big weights on it to try to flatten it out. So lesson learned, I got to go slower. If you're going to do that, don't hit it with so much paint. Go a little bit, let it completely dry. Do a little bit, let it completely dry.
I think that was a late addition to the project that made such a huge difference. I do not think it would have had as good a presentation without that backdrop. It cuts down on the noise behind it, really brings you back to the actual project.
Because the bookshelf doesn't have a back, it makes it feel like a real bookshelf would look in a room of that scale.
I think it was really important to the overall.
So we added that, and we added just little details. Like, I'm happy I got to use my Proxxon foam cutter table. I was like, woohoo! So take a big chunk of foam and make rows and rows of books. So first of all, the books that are on the bases are on, like, a couple extras that we had around the base and on the display board, super time consuming to make and to, so like, I wasn't about to make like 50 more books to put them behind.
Oh God.
So it was like nice to just take a big piece of foam and cut out a silhouette basically, and then airbrush. I added a little painting, right? So that was cool. Painting is a laser print, right, of semantic artwork, which, I would like to have a real painting there. We'll talk about that. So I took dollhouse baseboard and then just cut it and made a frame out of it. I also used it to finish the book.
I didn't know that's what that was.
I'm always looking for stuff like that. I'm not going to try to mill my own custom stuff, right?
You're crazy enough to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But then like, we got a lot more stuff that you really helped with. So we got lights. So we put some LED lights underneath the table.
That was a cool addition. It really, I think that brought people in.
And we did purple and green. I think were the two colors, purple and green.
Yeah,
there's two sets of lights, and it really, the torture souls were painted in a green ethereal color, right? And it really kind of made a luminous, ethereal, magical look to them. I thought that was great. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know you could crochet.
Well, I can crochet, but that was my mother did that one.
Well, anyway, she did a hell of a job on a custom run for us.
I haven't crocheted myself in like 10 years, but...
Well, she did it like a day, which was amazing, right?
She could knock out so many of that size. That's nothing.
And then we added a few potted plants, just to like, and you had some ivy that was added, and a little like banner or a little table leaf thing,
Yeah, like a mantle runner over the top.
Yeah, over top of the bookshelf. All those little things kind of just made it feel like you're looking into someone's room. And then the fact that there's all these books around, and there's this worn out library table with a bookshelf with lots of books on it, like it all just really leans into, this may not be the library, but someone that likes books lives here a lot.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that really sold the army were the extras, right? Like, yes, cool basing, cool display board, good paint jobs, great paint jobs. But the extras were the ones where people were like, wait, what? So you did army lists on parchment that was all stained up and rolled into a little scroll and had a wax seal.
So
and
that was maybe my favorite addition. So it was, I've done it in the past with staining. So coffee staining is what we used instead of tea staining. I think it just seems to work better. Then printed out the lists on that. And then we, wrapped it with twine and used hot glue and candle wax to make kind of a seal. And we handed a, sealed scroll to our opponent with both of our army lists each.
And it was awesome when they were breaking them open. I think, though, there was a tactical thing there because the thing was kind of hard to read. Like, I think that played to our advantage. Yeah. They didn't really know what our army list was because they're like, well, what's going on?
Yeah, I scribbled on it, too, some to just make it a little, rub some dirt and some important stats. Yeah,
exactly. And so you also did a nameplate for the board, which was an actual leather-bound book. In the book, you had handwritten the story, and you had a little space for our opponents to leave their mark, which was cool. We did buy some dice. We didn't make custom dice, but we did buy some dice that match kind of the color and the theme of the army. And then I think I showed you earlier on that I went to Hobby Lobby, and they had this book that's wood, and it was a box, but it was a book shape. Literally, like 2 days before the event, I'm like, I'm going to turn this into like a widget box and score and turn tracker. So it's basically like a big giant red book with a big abyssal demon head on it, airbrushed, which was actually fun to do. Like, it's not great, but like, making printing it out in paper and then cutting it out with an X-Acto knife and then airbrushing, like stenciling and stuff. Like, it was the first time I ever done that.
Yeah,
so
it looked great.
Cool.
I don't sell yourself short. It was awesome.
And then there was just some magnets that were drilled into the cover. And so we had the ability to track the turn, who went first, and if we had progressive scoring, we could track that as well. So, and all I did for the markers were, I have beads, right? Skull, red and white plastic beads you could buy anywhere. And in the past, I've used them to count wounds on like a pole. That's something that Gavin, my buddy, remember Gavin that ran Manticon? He used to do. Well, anyways, I took some of those beads, just drilled them a little wider, added a magnet, sprayed them in metallic colors, did a little highlight. Bob's your uncle. So came out pretty cool. Just in general, I think
well done.
I like the way the whole army came in. I guess we should circle back now at this point, because what everybody wants to really know about is all the cool paint jobs that we did. We have a blog, again, it goes over how where you get your inspiration for painting and color themes and kind of how you go about setting yourself, thinking about what you want to do. But you had this other step where you have to show someone that's never oil painted before. So I will say, you must be a very good teacher because you did teach me.
It looked like the same person painted it. It really did. Couldn't tell like where mine started and yours ended.
You could tell with the details, right? I think your metallics were better and some of your highlights were better. But yeah, the skin tone, which is an overall green color, I mean, like that was the overlying theme that carried through the whole army. But talk to us a little bit about the process you used to come up with the color.
When I start a project, I usually like to make either a Pinterest board or go to Instagram and pull pictures and put them in like a shared album and go through that. So really looking at Abyss and Night Stalkers, the primary just part of those is the skin tone. So that was I wasn't worried about anything else but the skin tone. The rest you can just fill in and it'll be fine. So had a lot of different things. I wanted to do something that was brighter. Last year, I think we hurt ourselves in going with a darker tone. So we had, some dark blues, dark purples, dark reds.
Very desaturated. It didn't jump off the table.
It did not have the pop. So I wanted the skin tone to be brighter. I did not have anything in mind before I started looking. I eventually found kind of some lighter skin tones that had blue and purple undertones that went up to kind of like an ivory. and then I saw some that had some green undertones that went up to an ivory. And I'd actually scrapped a Behringer project a while back that used essentially a version of the skin tone that we use. So I knew how to get close to that in theory, which led me to do the green instead of the blue or purple undertone on the skin. So it is a Paraline Black oil paint, which is actually a green, like a very dark, dirty greenish. And then a Brilliant Yellow Pale, which is like a pale yellow ivory type. And sometimes mixing in a little phthalo green as well. But getting up to an ivory desaturated skin with some green in the undertone. So we did oil paint for that. Oil paint and skin works really well because skin you don't want to see the layer lines. You want it to be very blended and smooth. And it's, a lot of times it's a large flat area. So that's very much in oil paint's wheelhouse. That's what it wants to do. So you essentially put that dark black green color on there. You wipe a lot of it off, and then you slowly start to add in that pale ivory, leaving some of that green in the recess, and it all kind of mixed together. And then you have to wait, unfortunately, a long time for it to dry. It depends on
like
the pigment.
2 weeks. Like 2 weeks.
So we yeah, it can, especially the reds. So we got.
I used some magenta for some of the tails, and it took a very long time for the magenta to dry.
Magenta is another one. Yep, your reds, your magentas, your purples, and your yellows typically take a long time as far as pigments go. So for the skin tone, we did that ivory green kind of sickly desaturated color, and we also added in some magentas. Used a purple matter, and then some, I think, radiant pink to get up to a more kind of desaturated rosy pink. And then I ended up going in with an airbrush after it dried with Pro Acryl fluorescent pink to punch out the saturation. So I wanted the skin to be very desaturated in a lot of spots, but then to have that bright saturation for the contrast with the pink. Then basically we decided we didn't want to do non-metallics, so we did Pro Acryl metals and Dirty Down Rust, which the Dirty Down products are great. Really enjoy those. You can kind of mess around with them if you use a little water to feather out the edges. So that worked out well. We went for red for the cloth, contrasted really well with the green in the skin. And since the skin didn't read as like a Christmassy green, it didn't end up looking like a Christmas themed army. As you can see that sometimes if you go with a very, prominent green and prominent red, you look like a Christmas army, which is not what we wanted to go for, but thankfully it didn't end up looking like that. That's kind of the painting in a nutshell. And anyone who's interested in oil paints or a bit more in that process, you can look at the blog or feel free to message me at any time. And I'm always more than happy to talk about how to achieve that kind of thing.
So what are your tips if you had to teach somebody in like a 2-hour session?
I mean, you joke, but there is an element of just grabbing it and doing it. You can read a book or listen to someone talk about it all day, but if you don't put it on the model, it just won't click or make sense. The first thing I ever did was I had an Underworld warband. After watching a few James Wapple videos, had some old, Stormcast models, and I messed around with those, and I still have them. They're not great, but you could see kind of the benefits of oils, and it was enough to make me want to continue. So if you're serious about it, I do think subscribing to James Wapple's Patreon at the whichever one, I think it's the Army pledge. It's like $15 a month, I believe, that level, and you just get a huge backlog of all these. I mean, he's the one who taught me, just going through his videos. But that is where I would start. It's helpful if you know somebody who's doing it, and they can kind of, what I did with Rob, just go over there for a day and show, the tips and tricks. That makes it a little easier because you can see in real time and someone can kind of correct, what you're doing and explain it a little better. But yeah, James Wapple is the one I would look at. And he obviously has free YouTube videos as well that go through some of the process. So if you're unable to subscribe, you could just watch. There's enough out there where you could get to a good spot.
Being the student in this, think some of the things that you were able to do is, number one, is you selected the colors. So you had already figured out the staining color that we wanted to put on first and what colors we wanted to mix in. If I was new to this, like, that would be difficult for me to, like, experiment with, like, waste a lot of time. I didn't have to think about it. Like, I already saw you do it, and you've already been painting models with those colors. So I already knew, like, what the end goal would be. The second thing was I limited myself to just really painting the skin tone. So I just used the Paraline black, obviously remove it with a makeup sponge and then add it and then highlighted with the brilliant yellow. And then for some models like the Abyssal Guard and the Succubi, they got purple tails, right? Like, so I mixed in some magenta. One of the interesting things was it's a completely different process. And at first I felt like I was trying to paint it like layering. And it was, number one, taking 10 times as long. And number two, it wasn't working. Because you don't layer oil paint. You put your stained base color on, you wipe most of it off, you mix up a color, right, the highlight, and you put it on, hopefully, and kind of blend it in on the go, and then you feather the edges, and then that's it. You're done. There was one model where I just kept going, I was trying to layer it, like, okay, I'm gonna add a little more yellow and go back and go, like, it doesn't work that way. So if I add more of the paint to what was already there, it doesn't build the color. It just replaces it, right? Hopefully that makes sense.
It augments. You're not layering over the top. You're augmenting the color that's already there.
Yeah.
And the longer you leave a color alone, it does start to set. And whatever color you're using next over that will have more of an impact than if you just immediately go and add a color. That color will just kind of blend in and meld, and you just get this, whatever mix immediately, which can be a benefit if that's what you're going for. If you're wanting to do a bit more contrasty and not have it blend that much, you really have to work your way on another part of the model and come back and later try to get to that color you're looking to get to.
You bring that up because that's exactly what happened with the magenta. So I did all the skin tones, and then I would go back maybe a day later and do the magenta on the tails. And I found that was much easier to do and get a very much more natural look to blend it in, rather than if I tried to add the magenta right away while it was fresh. If you have large, flat skin areas or big panels where you could layer it, you could use 2-brush blending, but man, oil is pretty awesome. And, by the end, so when I started, I don't know about you, but like I was looking at it, I was like, oh, this is okay, but okay. Like some of those lower abyssals, I was like, I mean, I had to paint like 65 models, right? So like, by the 40th one, I'm like, I think I'm getting there. And by the time I got to the Succubi,
you knocked them out of the park. They're gorgeous.
Yeah, well, for me, they are some of the best models I've ever painted. Like from a skin tone, like unfreaking believable, right? Like, I mean, there's no way I would have the patience. I barely had the patience to do it with oil. There's no way I would have been able to sit there for that many hours to get that layer. Again, there's lots of photos of the army over on the blog. This army is destined to go at the war room, and we'll have it on display there in the near future. I'm going to actually use the Abyssal part to go to a Adepticon. I've got to add some Nagari. So it's funny, Dan, all my stuff were infantry models, right? That's all I painted was infantry. Painting the Nagari has been a different animal, right? Like the scale is so much bigger. The blending is, I don't know how to explain it. Like it's harder. I actually think it's harder on the bigger models because it's easier to see the mistakes. Like on a little Succubi model, like if you mess it up a little bit, like it's really hard to tell. Like I don't know, it looks great. Now you got this big giant snake dude. It's like, oh, okay, there's a little spot here. And I also used it on an Abyssal Dwarf fleet, which I would not recommend ever doing this again because the Abyssal Dwarf fleet has these little panels all over the thing. And so I oil painted every single oil panel and blended everything. And like, by the time I was done, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like there was a point where my wife's like, are you going to bed? I'm like, well, I've got all this shit out. It's messy. I don't want to have to put the paint away.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And I had been at it for like 8 hours, right? I'm into it. And she's like, well, dude, you're gonna drive yourself crazy. I was like, yeah. But I will say, it is fun. It's a different skill set that I didn't have. And I think to your point, what you said before, it serves a purpose in certain roles. Like there's certain things, it is obvious where like, if I'm painting a bunch of fleshy dudes, 100%, I'm all over it. Going back to what you said about the color though, the theme of the color palette that you got where you use this from a a Varniger army that you threw away, that you didn't do. Mm-hmm. It's funny how that works, right? Because I had tried to do a Abyssal army a long time ago, like before Halpi's Rift. Like this was an underwater Abyssal army, and I did it in teal, auburn, and white. It looked like hot garbage. But then I was like, well, this might work on a halfling army, right? Or Kingdoms of Halfmen. So It's funny how that works sometimes. Like, I tried it on Abyssals and it didn't work, and I love how it worked on the Halfmen. So this is another example where, like, I would have never said we should paint green skin,
but it's bright.
But I didn't go crazy with airbrushing, but I did use the same metallics. I have my own Reaper Red Triad that I used that works okay. I know how that works. I've painted it enough now in my life that I know exactly. But it was super fun, like painting all the different succubi hair, because the Abyssal and the Abyssal Guard, like, they're all painted really the same, right? Like they're just abyssals. But the succubi adds a little more flash, got a little fancier face. The eyes are a lot harder to paint, right? The hairstyle. I mean, they got hair that goes between the eyes. I mean, it was super fun. When I look at the whole army, I was like, it looks like an army that was painted together. Like, it feels like, you just look at the army as a whole, and it feels like a consistent whole. It looks like the same army. It looks like Night Stalkers and Abyssals belong together. Thanks for showing me.
Using the same paint was a huge importance. Made a big difference between this year and last year.
Because I think last year you had already done some oil painting on some Empire of Dust. Because if I recall,
purple and red.
Because I went to the same color scheme that I've used a few times in my life. This very muted purples and blues. They're pretty colors. I don't know. It doesn't pop, right? And then the fact that we had like black basing last year. Remember? It was weird. Yeah. It was like a dark blue mixed wet blended with like a walnut color. It was crazy. And then we had snow on top. So
I'm embarrassed of it now. No, it's embarrassing. We can do better.
Well, to be fair, like, it was fine for a first attempt. And so next year, you now know we don't do 10, we go to 11. We don't have fast anything. Like, if we need to spend 100 extra hours to do something, we just start earlier and we do that, right? Like, end of the story. Like,
we're just going to do it.
In terms of, like, I like to call it like a post-mortem for the hobby. First of all, we kept it completely under wraps, but I did go into the event with a little bit of trepidation, like, what are people going to think of this? Because this is weird, right? Like, this is not your standard theme, right? And what were your thoughts about how did you expect people to receive the army?
I thought the reception would be good. I did not know, how it would be received. I guess I knew our paints, after we started, I knew the paint would be, high level, so people would at least appreciate that. When I saw the display board come together on your end, I knew that, okay, people are just going to walk up to this and be like, what the hell, guys? What did you do? Yeah. Because it really took, it took it to 11. I think the display board really, and the basing combined, just made it a project that people had to come and look at.
For some reason, I thought we started later on Saturday, so I didn't come and hang out with you guys on Friday night. I'm a family guy. I'm 50 years old. I got shit to do. But I did show up a little later. Like, I showed up like maybe 20 minutes before the thing starts. So I wheel our army in, or the cart in, and we're off to the side. We get it all set up, and it was just like, there was like this crazy like reaction to the army. Because I'll be honest with you, like, I have some cool armies, like Kingdoms of Halfmen, the Salamander army. Like, I've got some fun armies. I have never had a reaction like we had to this one. Like, Gibney's always glowing with compliments to people, but he was gushing. He was like over the moon, because to me, that's a Gibney theme. Like, if I had to go, what's a Gibney theme? He did a Barbie themed army, and he bought this like plastic dollhouse thing, and we worked on a display board, and that's the kind of theme he's into. Really crazy. And it was fun. It was fun to see his reaction.
Circling back to what we talked about in the beginning, Gibney was the one who really, he saw that BCB was kind of getting away from encouraging. We weren't seeing as many themed armies where both people make a new army and try to get something really cool on the tabletop. So he was a big driver of saying, like, well, let's incentivize that in the rubric. So I think he was happy to see that, not just us, but other teams are starting to say, let's look at this as a new project, not just some stuff we had that could be nasty together, and let's make this a hobby event. And hopefully it looks like we're getting back to that.
Maybe let's touch on what were some of the other armies that stood out to you, because the standard of hobby was high, even for people that were maybe matched up at the last minute. They did try to get the armies to kind of gel together.
My player's choice vote went to Jeff and Andy. They had a very cool
100%. Well, you mean Jeff? Let's be honest, it was Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff was pulling a lot of weight.
Our stuff is working because we're both contributing to the project. Can you imagine if there was 2 Jeffs? He'd probably beat us, right? Like, I mean, his stuff is improving every single year, right? Yeah, that was my favorite army as well. It was just such a great army. It was a nature and herd army where there was a lot of verdant tree units. And what I liked about it is his theme was death and life. Some of the units had fall foliage, right? So a lot of oranges and auburns and yellows colors. But then there was also like the same type of thing in a dead color. So it, like the bare trees. And it was a really, really heavily textured up display board where, lots and lots of trees and some really cool ruins. And again, chef's kiss to Jeff. And I don't know if you noticed this, but the best thing on his army, the best thing on that display board for his air elementals, he used glue to spread it on like, I don't know, some surface that he was able to peel, but then he sprinkled leaves into it and he made little air funnels with leaves that were shooting out of the air elementals. I was like, I'm stealing that idea.
I've never seen it. Cool. Yeah, I told him I've never seen that technique. So
it was amazing.
So
and you know what? It's in Rob's head now. And Jeff, I'm going to make it 10 times better than you next year. Whatever we do, you had an idea to 10. I'm going to 11. That's why we don't share our project until the end. I'm not giving away the goods. But yeah, that was a great army. I think the other one is obviously Ryan and Mark from Texas, right? They always bring it.
Yeah.
They brought a display board, which was really neat, where one army was inside the fort defending it and the other army was attacking it. And so it was a battle scene. Super cool, super great. And I give Mark a lot of shit about his painting, but he can paint. Any other armies jump out at you?
Obviously Billy and Nate's was very cool. Anything Billy touches is going to be good. That one jumped out at me. Paul Welsh is such a good painter, and I've seen the army that he brought already. On its own, probably the best painted army 100%. In the room. Ours was just more, built for this and combined. And we had, but even I thought his Night Stalkers paired well with Gibney's theme. He was doing Trident Realms, and it had this very Cthulhu, weird occult vibe. And Gibney did make a little display board where the bottom half was poured resin, like water effects for his Trident Realms, and the top was more rocky to match Paul's. And it did look good together. Absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I didn't even know Gibney still played Kings of War.
Paul needed a partner, so there you go.
Maybe touch on, what's the future for this army? For me personally, the only future that I know of is I'm going to add a unit of Nagari so I can play 1,200 points at Adepticon. Do you see Night Stalkers in your future?
I do not. Not in the near future, at least. I don't have any plans on next army, other than I feel like I probably need to start on next year's BCB army here in a month or two.
Future is bright, but we've already started thinking about theme. Well, before we do get out of here, let's maybe just give a quick flyby on our games, because we had I don't know about you, I had so much fun. This was like the best set of opponents I think I've ever had in an event. Like, there were no arguments. I was like, well, you never have arguments at BCB, but like, it was just like, cool. It was just a good 5 games. You want to maybe just walk us through, give us the elevator pitch for each of the games?
Sure. And I'll do a really quick summary of each of them, just kind of give who it was and what the scenario was, and kind of
you might even just say what was the key point. What was the key point in the game, right? Like, what was the key point that turned it one way or the other?
So game 1 to start the morning off was against Wes and Larry. They had Night Stalkers and Elves. The scenario was Bulldog. The biggest difference was our brawler was Bowen, who can fly. And they did not have Bowen. And in this particular game, Bowen did not lose fly or his speed or nimble. So we got to do whatever we wanted with the token, basically. And Wes and Larry put it on a horde of bloodworms, and they just could not get it across the table quick enough to really compete in that area. So that game was, I mean, it hinged on Bowen. Just having that was such a big difference in the game that if we were the other team in that scenario and they had Bowen and we didn't, it would have been a really hard task to win. Game 2 was against Thompson and Walt from across the pond. Love both of those guys. They're family to me. We played Fool's Gold. I'd had like 3-4 beers, so we were like really flying in the right zone right about this point. Token placement was great. We had some blocking terrain in front of our 2, like close enough to where they had a hard time getting in to contest it. And we just kind of dealt with the infantry on the right side of the board. We kind of had a standoff because we had better pieces that could reach further. So we went when we needed to go. We were able to clean it up. And we held off Walt's werewolves on the other side and made them take charges that maybe they weren't looking to take. So we had a good 20-point win in that one. Game 3 was against Bodine and Andy, who played Herd in Nature. So it was kill. I saw an opportunity. I'm not saying to win the game, but our best path to victory was they had some smaller units on the left where we deployed pretty heavily. And I thought we had the tools over there to kind of pick up some of their smaller units and delay and hopefully bring our fast stuff back around at the end of the game and pick up enough points to either draw or maybe get a minor win, and kind of put the pressure on them. It definitely did not work that way. I had maybe one of the worst rolls in my entire life. Soul Flares into the flank of their Bowen or whatever brawler they had. Maybe it was a goad. So 24 attacks on 2s and 3s, did maybe 3 wounds. Absolutely abysmal. Bodine and Andy are great players, so they would not allow a mistake like that to stand. It let them take away one of our best pieces, and they encircled us, and in kill, you can't get circled. Mm-hmm. And they just, did terrible things to us. So that was our first loss. We only got 8 points out of that. So then we go to game 4 the next day against the Blakemores, who we love, Dwarves and Basileans. It was compass points, which I do like that scenario, actually. But the best part of this game, it was our best played game.
Yeah, it took Jackson some time to figure out how to pop the Dome Glass Shield with Cloak of Death, which is on his Phoenix. So the fact that he missed that play was very helpful, because it meant when we put the Seductress into the Knights on the left flank, she stuck around for a while and just made their life miserable.
Oh, yeah. And the key takeaway from that game was getting what I wanted from deployment. I saw them put down a horde of shield breakers, who are melee 3, defense 4, crush 2 on the left flank. I immediately put down doppelgangers and thought my entire game is getting these into that. So we did live the dream. We got them unhindered into the shield breakers, which was 25 attacks on 2s and 2s with elite. Did 24 wounds, picked them up. I'll never forget it. So if I ever play Night Stalkers, doppelgangers are going in the list, because I'll be chasing
more than one regiment, hopefully.
My life. Yeah. Oh yeah, we're going 3, I think. So last game, game 5. So we're 3-1 at the time. We go into Joey and Randy, which is Dwarves and Jarvis Undead, which I thought was a really cool way to get their armies together. I really enjoyed that. It was our luckiest game. It was a lot of posturing. We were playing kind of cat and mouse standoff. They shot off our succubi with throwing dogs, which honestly I didn't hate to lose because we didn't have any crushing strength and their defense was very high. It came down to the last turn. So on turn 6, we made some charges that got enough points into the outside zones to hold the outside zones. They needed to come in and pick up some pieces. They weren't able to do so. Had the game gone to 7, they would have won in a landslide. Joey rolled the die, and it was a 2, I think. So it didn't go on. So it was our luckiest game. Joey and Randy played really well. They did give up a flank. Well, I'll say Randy gave up a flank charge. From,
not Joey.
A horde of butchers onto a steel behemoth, and Joey, when he saw that I saw it, he was unhappy. Yeah. So that was our game. So that one was a 20-point win, which was great. We finished 4-1, and that was enough for the overall win, which I was not expecting.
Yeah, we ended up with 93 points in battle, and best general actually had 97, which were the War Dogs. We had the highest hobby score, so we got 59. Is that out of 60? 59 out of 60? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
So yeah, we had the highest hobby score. We couldn't win best painted though, technically, because we won overall. We won by 2 points because we paint better than Jeff and Andy. Well, technically we paint better than Jeff. Yeah, it was cool though. It was cool to win a trophy. Obviously you're a Blue City guy. I'm actually a War Dog. So it was kind of funny because they make the trophies based on the club that wins it. So I think next year Devlin needs to make like maybe a bear with dog hands, or maybe it's a dog with bear hands. Something like that. That'd be pretty, like some kind of hybrid, like, something that like Chef would come up with in South Park, like an elephant makes love to a pig.
There have already been discussions on what it can be. I won't reveal any of them, but there are already talks about what the trophy's going to look like.
I think we've been at this for a while, so just huge thanks to all of our opponents. It was a super fun event. Huge thanks to Devlin. Right? It goes uncredited a lot of times, the amount of effort it takes to run an event, and it was fun for me to get to poke the bear about the terrain.
Oh, I know you do.
I love it.
It's the biggest smile you had all weekend.
I will say the terrain is top notch at Blue City, but there were some tables. Shit got lost on the table. Like I can't see any, like some of the mats were so busy. I couldn't, I didn't know where our units started or stopped or where our dice were. Very difficult, but I love the fact every year you guys are adding more and more and more. It was awesome putting this army together. Again, go over to countercharge.net. We'll have all the blogs there. If there's questions you have, reach out to me and Dan. Like honestly, the highlight of the event for me was just when we laid the army out and got to see people's reactions because they were all positive.
Oh yeah,
right?
100%. 100%.
It was great. It was great. We'll do it again next year. We'll run it back. And, and if Andy's painting the army, because they alternate every year, that takes them out of running. So, I guess we just have to worry about Billy and whoever. Now question.
Next man up.
So Nathan Clevenger, great player in the Southeast. He likes to pick different brawlers. He's a one and done kind of guy, right? Like he's done with Billy. He's going to move on. So he's played with you and they won the event, right? But you're off the market now because you've got then he's played with Billy. He's played with Nick Gunther. The ones that are good enough to be his dance partner already have a partner.
There was talk about Devlin doing it, but he's going to have to run the event. So
yeah, I'm excited. So that might be something we have to put wagers on to see who Nathan picks.
Think I could see Randy Davis.
So, all right, Nathan, if you're thinking about it, let us know who you're going to play next year. Well, all right, guys, it's been a long conversation. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Again, go over to the blog and follow up and dive into the tutorials that we presented. And if there's questions, let me and Dan know. We're all over Facebook. You can also just, when we post this up on Facebook, just drop a line there. You can hit us up on the Kings of War forum or anywhere else you see us. I think that's going to close us out for Blue City Brawl 2025. Now it's time to start next year's planning. And until next time, keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons.